Hi, I'm Delia. I am an art consultant with an unpretentious approach. Welcome back to my YouTube channel where I talk to you about why you should become an art collector and exactly how to do that. In a previous video, I spoke to you about the number one reason that I think people delay becoming an art collector, which is the perception of a very high price point. In that video, I broke down some more affordable options, different budgets that you can consider, and ways of acquiring art at a significantly lower price point than people anticipate. Today, I'd like to talk about the second main reason that I think people tend to not become art collectors until way late in life, if ever, and ways to break it down. So that is a factor of overwhelm. Purchasing art is really overwhelming. There is no doubt about that. There are so many different sources, types of art, there's tons of information to glean. It's overwhelming. There are two main components to that overwhelm that I would like to talk about today. The first is a knowledge gap, and the second is intimidation. I want to kind of give an overview of both and then give you real examples and solutions to those problems so that you can get collecting. So the knowledge gap issue. There is a ton of information that a collector needs in order to be effective and successful as an art collector. It's a lot of information that tends to not get passed on very effectively. It's a little bit secluded. It's hard to gather that information. It can be really, really overwhelming to begin. If you're not in the arts, there's just a ton of information to learn. Unfortunately, we talk a lot about arts funding and the lack of funding early in education and how that just continues to plummet in this country. I think that there's an additional component to that we really never talk about. So when we hear people talk about the lack of arts funding, what we're really hearing is a lack of drawing classes and practical arts, which is meant for the creative, artistic path, which is great. We should definitely be incorporating that into our education. But there's a second component that I think is almost never addressed in a formal education setting and really should be. And that is the influence of art in our personal lives and on our society. So we don't really have a way of speaking about the arts as culturally important unless you are in an arts industry. It's just not really addressed in sociology classes. It's not really addressed in anthropology classes, in any kind of human studies, in history. We just really kind of gloss over the relevance of art in our daily lives and our collective experience. So that's our overview. Practical that I would like to offer you. There are tons of ways that you can go about educating yourself on everything that you need, really, to have a robust appreciation of arts. There's one book in particular that I think really does a great job of grounding the arts in our everyday and providing real examples of how you can engage with art. And that is a book called Art as Therapy. Highly recommended. It's an enjoyable read. Obviously, if you don't like reading, that's a bummer for you, but you can flip through it. It doesn't need to be read cover to cover. It's super interesting. It's broken down really effectively with different major themes in our lives that kind of help tie it back to our relevance. You can pick a section that is calling to you. My one caveat with this book, I don't feel that it really talks much about contemporary arts or currently working, living artists, which I think is really unfortunate. Again, it's why in my work I focus so much on emerging and living artists, because I think there is a relevancy component to our culture and our day-to-day lives that really needs to be a part of what we're doing when we become art collectors. So that's my biggest issue with the book, but it provides some really beautiful practices and perspectives to think about the way that art can serve as a resource in your life. The second component of overwhelm is intimidation, and this is a big one. I feel like we will probably talk about this again at some point, so I'm not going to get too deep into this at the moment, but I just want to acknowledge that the art world is really intimidating. It is intimidating for people who are inside it. It's just got this air of elitism and pretension, which we are trying to counter, but it's there. It's annoying, honestly. I think that the biggest problem with this intimidation has to do with language and art jargon that is used. It creates such an exclusive group of people that know that language, know those terms, and anyone on the outside of that feels dumb and inadequate and like they cannot have a conversation about art when, as we have talked about, art is essential to our human experience, and it's really just about your emotional processing of it and your personal connection to it. So the language thing is really irritating to me. It is in every book that you read about art, it's in all the articles you read about art, it's when you go to galleries, it's when you talk to, any kind of art curator. Artists sometimes will adapt that language because it is the language of a collector, of these institutions of art that they are aspiring to have their work in. It's super frustrating, easy to overcome. Because the reality is, behind all of that jargon, behind the authors who are writing, the gallerists who are talking to you, the artists, the curators, anybody who is speaking about art are real people who have a real love for art. And you can come at it from your personal experience, talking in super plain language. You don't need to know any terms. And when people start throwing terms around, you can just request that they stop or define them if you want to learn, but you don't have to. It's just a bunch of nonsense. It's jargon. It's useful when you're in that industry. It's really, really unfortunate when people in that industry insist on using that jargon when talking to people who are aspiring collectors or are interested in learning more, because it just leads into this sense of academic elitism and knowledge acquisition and all of these things that have pushed art into that elitist realm that we have talked about. It's so annoying. It's just so annoying. So just disregard it, or find people who are willing to have a normal ass conversation with you that doesn't talk about art history, that doesn't talk about different movements, that doesn't talk about technique terms that you would have no reason to know. We can talk about art in such plain language that gets our point across way more effectively, and we should be. And if you're interacting with someone or reading something where they're not doing that, find someone who will speak to you in a way that makes a lot more sense. That's my tip. I know that that's not the easiest thing to act out. I think that, we read resources and they throw jargon terms in there, and you're not going to just email an author asking for an explanation. But I think you can be a little bit specific in who you end up speaking to about art, and just don't let it get to you is the other thing. I think if you walk into a gallery and they start throwing terms at you, just stand your ground as a person who has an absolute right to appreciate art, talk about art, and speak about it from whatever voice you want to, whatever voice is honest to you, whatever is going to help you have a deeper and more personal understanding and connection to that piece of art. So that's about it. Basically, I think Overwhelm is real and it is very understandable. I think, again, as I talked about in my very first video, I think that the push of art towards an elitist part of society was really deliberate, and it's totally unfortunate because it has left so many people feeling on the outside, feeling frustrated and overwhelmed when they start to dip into the art world. Because it is just very obnoxious and there's just a ridiculous amount of jargon thrown around. And, I really do think that a part of what I am hoping to do is empower people to feel really confident knowing whatever they know and walking into the art world as an art collector. Actually, that makes me want to talk about one other thing, which is the term art collector. I think that term is really enshrouded in an idea of wealth and, a certain level of prestige. And instead of throwing that term out, I would really like for people to reclaim it. If you have art in your home, no matter how much that art cost you or whether you made it yourself or whatever, if you have art in your home, you are actively adding art to your collection. It is a part of what you are interested in doing in your life. You're an art collector. Who gives a shit what you spent on that piece of art or if the artist is known or any of that? That is another element of prestige that drives me absolutely nuts. I think it's what adds to this idea that regular people can't become art collectors, because it just seems like such a jump up from buying a piece of art to becoming an art collector. And it's really not. It's just really not. Okay, I think that's it for the day. It was a little bit of a rant, but thank you for watching. As always, please leave me your questions. I really I'm here to serve you and answer questions that come up and do so in as direct of a way as I possibly can. So leave comments on this video if questions popped up. Tell me what you think. Next week, you're going to be seeing a home tour of a private art collection that I'm excited to show you. And I will see you back here in a couple weeks.